April 14th, 1912, at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank into the icy waters of the North Atlantic Ocean. We all know the story. The massive ocean liner had 2,223 people aboard for her maiden voyage. Sadly, 1,517 of them died. What if I told you that over a century later, there are some people that believe the Titanic never sank at all? You're listening to Truth vs. Tales, the podcast where we take a widely known story and examine whether in fact it is the truth, or if it's a tale someone wants us to believe. Today's episode of Truth vs. Tales is about the sinking of the Titanic. If you have any stories or topics you would like to hear in future episodes, email us at tylerstalespodcast@gmail.com. That's Tyler's, T-A-L-E-S, podcast@gmail.com. Now on to the episode. Welcome to Truth vs. Tales. I'm your host, Tyler. As you can tell from the intro, today we're talking about the sinking of the Titanic. We're not going to spend too much time on the official story, since it's so well known. So here's a quick timeline of events. April 10th, 1912. The Titanic set sail on her maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City. April 14th, 1912. Just 4 days into the trip, at approximately 11:40 p.m., the Titanic struck an iceberg. Over the course of the next several hours, the ship proceeded to sink into the icy waters of the North Atlantic Ocean, eventually coming to rest on the ocean floor, claiming 1,517 lives in the process. Now that story seems pretty cut and dry. But like most events throughout history, most major or tragic events throughout history, other theories have been brought up throughout the years as to what could have happened that night. I've heard that there was a fire on the Titanic, and they were trying to burn as much coal as possible so the accelerant is not there, and that's why they were going too fast, didn't see an iceberg, and you know the rest. I've also heard that they were transporting a mummy, and that somehow cursed the ship, and it sank. That one I find a little hard to believe. But I've also heard that the Titanic never sank at all. That theory is what this podcast is going to focus on. It is by far the most intriguing and compelling theory of them all. To understand this theory, we need to start at the beginning. When the White Star Line Company had the Titanic built, she was one of 3 sister ships, all of which were built at Harland and Wolff's shipping yard in Belfast. The first ship built was the Olympic, then there was the Titanic, and finally the Britannic. The ship we will be focusing on is the Olympic. It is also important to understand that the Olympic and the Titanic were built using the same model and looked almost identical. There were a few differences, such as layout of the ship, but they were very similar. The Olympic set sail on her maiden voyage in 1911, 1 year before the Titanic. During that voyage, the ship actually collided with another ship, the HMS Hawke, and was sent to Belfast for repairs. Once repaired, the Olympic set out on another voyage. Upon returning from that one, she was sent back to Belfast once again for even more repairs. This is where the theory starts to take off. Supposedly the damage done to the Olympic was far too extensive and was not cost effective for the White Star Line Company to have it repaired. Also, since it was the first of the ships built, it was not insured. According to this theory, at this point the owner of the White Star Line Company, one J.P. Morgan, yes, that J.P. Morgan, made a decision. That decision was to swap interior and exterior components between the Olympic and the Titanic, which was currently sitting at the same shipping yard only a few weeks away from her maiden voyage. Once the components were swapped and the ships were renamed on their exteriors, no one would know the difference. That way, when the Titanic, or the Olympic, according to this theory, sinks, they get an insurance payout since the Titanic is insured, and in 1912, no one is going to the bottom of the ocean to ensure that's actually the Titanic. Alright, so right now you might be thinking to yourself, would J.P. Morgan really sentence 1,517 people to their death for an insurance scam? But there's more. It was during this time when J.P. Morgan was trying to establish the Federal Reserve. However, he had some opposers. 3 big opposers of the Federal Reserve: Jacob Astor, Isidor Straus, and Benjamin Guggenheim were all on the Titanic, and they all perished. Less than 2 years after the sinking, J.P. Morgan and his colleague J. Bruce Ismay established the Federal Reserve. Now, it could just be a coincidence. However, J.P. Morgan and J. Bruce Ismay were supposed to be on the Titanic. They both backed out last minute. Why would they do that? Also, within an hour of the Titanic's departure, J.P. Morgan had 7 bronze statues, 7 extremely valuable bronze statues, removed off the ship. Now, why would he do that? And then, on top of all that, there's the story of the SS Californian. So the SS Californian was another ocean liner. It was departing from Southampton, England, same as the Titanic, or the Olympic, and going to Boston. However, it had 0 passengers. Clearly, there would have been people wanting to cross the ocean. But what the SS Californian did have was a full cargo load of blankets and warm clothing. So, did J.P. Morgan send the captain of the SS Californian to rescue the survivors of the Titanic? We'll never know, because Captain Lord of the SS Californian forgot his wireless chart, so he had no way to navigate to the Titanic in the middle of the night. That led to the Carpathia rescuing the survivors, which is the story we all know. So this is kind of where the J.P. Morgan aspect of the theory stops. What we're going to talk about now is the differences between the Olympic and the Titanic. So when the Titanic was pictured being built, it had 14 evenly spaced portholes. But when it left Southampton on its maiden voyage, there are reports it had 16 unevenly spaced portholes, which matches the exterior design of the Olympic. There's also the report that the name Titanic, the first T, started beneath the 3rd porthole. However, when it was leaving, the first T in Titanic started further down the ship. So it's either they repainted and painted a name in a different place, or it's not the same ship. Then, adding to this theory, is the fact that when the Olympic, or the Titanic, according to this theory, was decommissioned in 1935 in the UK, it was parted out immediately, and some of its wood was used in the construction of the White Swan Hotel in Alnwick, UK. And on that wood used, you see a number imprinted, and it says 401, which is the number that was assigned to the Titanic. The Olympic was given number 400. So that means if the wood is tagged 401, it's from the Titanic, not the Olympic. And then finally, on top of all of this, you have the testimony of the workers at Harland and Wolff's shipping yard in Belfast, where the ships were built. Several workers have since come out and said that they were a part of this swap, that it in fact happened, and they helped. They said that the White Star Line Company and someone high up in the government met with them and strong-armed them, essentially saying, if you tell anybody about this, your job at the White Star Line Company will be the last job you ever have. Alright, so let's recap what we have. First, the Titanic had 2 sister ships, the Britannic and the Olympic. The Olympic and the Titanic were made from the same model and looked almost identical. Then you have that the damaged Olympic was not insured and the Titanic was. Then J.P. Morgan's 3 biggest opposers to the Federal Reserve were all on the Titanic, and they all died. J.P. Morgan and his partner in the establishment of the Federal Reserve, J. Bruce Ismay, both backed out of traveling on the Titanic at the last minute. And J.P. Morgan even had 7 extremely valuable bronze statues removed from the ship an hour before departure. The USS Californian left from Southampton as well, but with 0 passengers and only a cargo load of blankets and warm clothing, Was that intended for the survivors of the Titanic? The differences in the portholes and the location of Titanic's name from pictures taken during construction and then at departure. The wood that was supposedly used from the decommissioned Olympic in 1935 was used in the construction of the White Swan Hotel, and it is stamped with the number 401, which was assigned to Titanic. The Olympic was given the number 400 since it was built first. And then you have the workers from Harland and Wolff's shipping yard in Belfast, where the ships were built. And they say they were a part of this. They swapped ships, and they were strong-armed, not only by their company, but by someone in the government, that if they were to say anything, they'd be ex-nated, they'd be out of here. So that's the theory, that the Titanic never sank, but the Olympic did. So now that you've heard this, you should have the information to decide for yourself. If not, go do some more research, and then come to your own conclusion. Which is the truth, and which is the tale.
These my dollars make it hurt.